They were the stories that have charmed an entire generation. From the books to the television series, people around the world have grown up with the railway stories, and all their cheerful characters. But the truth behind Thomas and his friends was no children's fantasy. The truth would be horrifying. It is 1945, and the remote island of Sodor, off the northwest coast of England, has emerged from the fog of World War II, relatively unscathed and untouched.
The island served as a detention camp for Germans living in England. That's how Professor came to be here.
Professor Wilhelm Gertzer was born in 1903 in Munich, Germany. A doctor in biology, he became a prominent advisor to the ruling party in the 30s.
Wenn die älteren Jahrgänge noch wanken werden könnten, die Jugend ist uns verschrieben und verfallen mit Leiblichkeit.
In 1939, as war escalated, he, his wife Olga, and 4-year-old son Hans fled the country.
Tja, ich habe nie einen solchen Befehl bekommen. Er hat einmal gefragt, nicht wahr? Am 14. Mai 1942 war der Großadmiral Räder und ich bei ihm.
That's what he wanted people to believe. The fact is, his experiments were hard to stomach even for his own people.
In truth, he had become a prominent figure in the government, but as his work progressed, questions and objections had been raised in the higher echelons of the Reich.
His work with genetics and DNA was truly pioneering. The cracking and manipulating of the human genome. What Professor Gertzer was most successful in, however, was keeping his history a secret until his death.
In an attempt to gain favour among the German hierarchy, Wilhelm Gertzer was at the forefront of the government's most fanatical policies. In 1938, he was influential in instigating the infamous Sajmelnacht, the Night of Sawdust. But as his experiments advanced, he became a much less popular figure and soon feared for his and his family's lives.
As soon as he escaped to England, he was banged up here. But locals were nice to him. There was no hostility, and many of them chose to live here after the war.
Following their release, Professor Gertzer, Olga and young Hans chose to remain. After studying under his father, Hans left at the age of 18 and went to university on the mainland, studying biology and engineering, writing several pioneering papers about genetics and the splicing of DNA with mechanical implants.
He called it biofusion, the technique of manipulating genetic material to splice with mechanical attachments. However, much like his father, the British government became more and more concerned with Hans Gertzer's proposals. So he was forced to seek financial backing from home.
His dad left Germany with quite a few bob, so Hans came back. He saw our little island as some sort of refuge where he could work in peace. Soon every nutcase and eccentric was coming over.
By 1962, Hans had set up Sodor Research, a small lab near the town of Alsborough, but soon the enterprise began supplying medical equipment and machinery, and quickly grew to become a large complex, comprising its own links to the growing Sodor rail system.
Young Abby Collins from the town was working there when Professor Hans took a liking to her. Soon they were married, and not long after, the town was buzzing with news of her pregnancy.
Baby Thomas was born in 1968. Throughout the early years of his life, he would watch the growing railway network with fascination.
He couldn't get enough of trains. His dad bought him one of the first video cameras, and he'd be on the platforms every day. You can see me in some of those tapes.
Hiya, Mr. Hartley.
Morning, Thomas. But he was friends with everyone, even that simple bloke who could only say where he lived.
Sodor.
But his favourite trains were the old steam engines.
Steam engines were a dying art on the British mainland, but Hans also had a fondness for them, much like his son, and liked to keep them running for our purposes, taking orders from the labs to the growing docks. or to the mainland to be transferred to modern postal express trains.
But as the Sodor rail system expanded, it found itself increasingly under the supervision of the new British rail network and appointed a new controller.
Oi! Get off my f***ing platform!
Sir Topham Hatt. Born into money, he took his ridiculous name to heart and started wearing a top hat all the time. Of course, the islanders had a different name for him.
Fat bastard. You've never met such a cold-hearted as him. He banned all steam engine volunteers and cut most of rail employees, shut down the branch line and the smaller stations. He was happy to let the railway rust away, just like they did to main line.
But the fortunes of the railway were about to take a profitable turn, a stroke of luck for the island that would result from tragedy.
Come on, we're gonna be late. What's the time? Thomas, get moving.
Young Thomas loved following railway. He'd be out all the time, hoping to catch a new train on his camera.
11:45's coming through soon. He won't wait for us.
Unfortunately, he didn't take as much notice of the safety signs.
I'm not being late again. Have we missed it yet? Wait for the 11:45. Never mind the 11:45. It must be late again. Thomas, come on. It's always held up.
Hans was mortified. He disappeared from public view and into the labs. Locking himself in, he wouldn't allow anyone in there. Eventually his father Wilhelm came to see him.
In a few days, a major laboratory had been locked down, followed by an engine maintenance shed, which was to become off-limits to all.
All production was shut down, orders weren't met, but the two Professor Gertzers didn't care. More and more equipment was being delivered daily, but no one was allowed in Shed 17.
Questions started being asked on Sodor. Where were the Gertzers? Would there be no funeral for young Thomas? And where was the body?
They'd arranged for Thomas to be transferred to a mainland hospital. He'd been taken to the complex but was never moved by rail. We all assumed the obvious, he was still in lab.
But if Thomas was there, was he still alive? And what was the purpose of keeping him at the complex? Almost a year after the accident, the doors of Sodor research were reopened. In an open invitation to the people of the island, Thomas rolled out of Shed 17.
It took me a moment to realise what it was I was looking at. When he looked at me and said,
Hiya, Mr. Hartley.
it dawned on me what Hans Gertzer and his dad had done. One woman passed out as Thomas smiled at us. I had to run off round the side of the shed.
Hey, are you alright, Keith?
As news spread across the country, the world's media rushed to Sodor Island.
They kept trying to interview me. I became a bit of a celebrity.
Controversy on Sodor Island. Questions asked about science ethics.
It's fair to say I was pretty nervous at
I'm
times,
joined now by Keith Hartley.
but I think I put on a brave
Sodor
face.
Island. What did you think when you first came to meet Thomas the Tank Engine?
Most of my mates said I looked pretty good on telly. The mayor said I'd represented the people of Sodor very well. It's important to show you're confident when people are asking you awkward questions.
Good evening. An act of mercy or a crime against humanity? I am joined now by Keith
Even when
Hartley.
some of the questions got difficult, I made sure I knew what I was talking about.
What was your reaction when you first met a talking tank engine?
If you can't make an informed opinion, or if you can't string together two words on telly, well, maybe you shouldn't be on there.
There are two sides to this.
Admittedly,
We've
the
read
subject
one
matter was a bit
lot.
bizarre
Let's hear the other one.
sometimes.
There are some dark forces at work here.
You were alright as long as you could win over the
See
audience.
this, they're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you.
The Gertzer family refused to answer any questions. Behind closed doors, the only question they agreed to answer had been asked repeatedly. Would Thomas work on the railway? The response was an emphatic no.
Thomas's DNA had been reprogrammed to accept and adapt to the engine structure, using the engine's internal system to maintain his organic functions. What no one could be sure of was how much of the engine was mechanical and how much was organic material.
Thomas had been able to move around without coaches, but to work on the railway, his engine would need to be fired up and operated by a driver and fireman.
Since no one could be sure how much of the engine was Thomas, the pressure caused by the engine could rupture his organs from the inside, and the incredible heat could boil him alive. Professor Hans and his father vowed Thomas would never work on the railways.
Similarly, the two professors were to refuse many requests by people from around the world who wished to be biofused into engines.
There were billionaires offering to pay whatever they wanted to be converted into an engine or some other transport. Train enthusiasts too, and people with terminal illnesses were desperate to be made into trains. But for some reason, the Gertzers refused.
But there would be other interested parties, eager to seize on the biofusion goldmine. The independently wealthy Topham Hatt staged a hostile takeover and within weeks had bought a controlling share in Sodor research.
Immediately, the policy of the company changed, and so did the ethics. The medical supply wing was shut down, and work began on mass biofusion experiments and operations. Anyone who could afford it, some handing over their whole fortunes, were turned into engines.
But, along with the new policy, there would be worse to come. Biofused engines would be allowed, then obliged, to work on the railways.
The first one we fired up was James. He didn't have the money some of these people had, and so agreed to basically sign his life away if they wanted to experiment further, or to take massive risks like this. As usual, the fat had everything recorded. All kept classified, you understand.
These recordings, shown for the first time, reveal the extent of Sir Topham Hatt's experiments.
It was horrible watching these engines work on the railways some days. But the tourists wanted to see it. They expected it. And for me, it was work.
But, with the new engine's increasing work schedule, came more and more accidents.
Edward was first to have problems. He'd been filming all day for the new TV series they'd announced, and for his last scene, he had to pull into Wellsworth Station and whistle to the kids on the platform.
Peep, peep! Whistled Edward. Thank you very much.
Sadly, this was only the first in an increasing number of incidents.
Harold had an obsession with aircraft and had paid to become a helicopter. The operation had gone well, but we had to ban him from being allowed to attempt flight.
In an experiment kept secret until now, Mavis the diesel engine was to be the first biofused locomotive used on the railway.
We fueled her up and everything seemed fine. Then things got out of hand.
The diesel began to burn her internal organs. Everything organic in the engine was soon burning.
Have you ever heard a locomotive scream in pain? We tried rinsing out the fuel tank with water, but by then it was too late.
Mavis's body would be kept under lock and key indefinitely. In an unexpected U-turn, Sir Topham Hatt would ban fueled engines from being used on the island.
Harold was never told why he couldn't fly, but the decision would keep him alive, if only for a little while longer.
In fact, unknown to the outside world, there had been many failed biofusion experiments.
That fat bastard kept the accidents a secret, and legal disclaimers had to be signed by anyone being biofused, so there'd be no legal action taken if anything went wrong. with all accidents happening, everyone started asking the same thing. Why had Thomas, the first engine, worked so well?
Despite all the troubles the other engines had, Thomas had worked fine, seemingly oblivious to the other engines' problems and accidents.
Keeping their problems a secret from the outside world, Sodor Research began selling the technology to other countries in multi-million-pound deals. These countries would have less qualms about the use of fuel engines, and even the modern electric trains. Even failed biofused engines were being displayed publicly in what would become a kind of freak show. To his horror, Professor Hans Gertzer saw what this was leading to: slavery of engines, and immediately resigned. His father, Wilhelm, would go one step further.
Professor Wilhelm couldn't come to terms with what was happening to his engines, and took the only course he thought he could take.
That fat got a load of us rail staff over to his house to clean up after the body was taken away. You should have seen it. Sawdust everywhere. It took us days.
But such attempts to keep the incidents on Sodor a secret were short-lived, after a very public accident.
Gordon paid an enormous amount to be Sodor's first 462 configuration engine, much bigger than any other engine at the time. We were terrified that fat shite would make us fire up that huge engine.
We were shocked to discover he had insisted on being able to work on the railway. So, one night, after the regular staff had finished for the day, fat some of the rail staff and I fired up the engine.
As usual, these experiments were filmed. This footage has never been broadcast before.
Dr. Ruth and I filmed it all.
It might be a bit shaky. It was handheld. At first, Gordon complained about the heat. Then that turned to pleas to douse the fire.
But that fat bastard held us back. He wanted to see what would happen.
He argued he had put a lot of work into Gordon, and the chances to get him working were too great an opportunity. He was literally cooking from the inside. By the time we were allowed to act, it was too late.
I wasn't as near to him as some of them. All I could do was run. I was lucky to get away with some singed clothes. Others weren't so lucky.
The fateful few hours following the accident would seal the fate of Sodor Research.
The fat stopped us trying to put out the fire, insisting that any evidence would fall back on us.
He kept repeating, "This was all your fault. You knew the dangers. You're legally to blame." He stopped us calling for ambulances or the fire brigade.
We told him, "These are injured people here. They're going to die unless we do something." But he kept saying, "No one from the outside can come in. No one can see this."
Finally, someone suggested we airlift them to hospital. Harold was banned from flying for his own safety, but we thought the risk was worth it.
Fueling Harold was a nervous experience. Would he have the same reaction Mavis had?
We all breathed a sigh of relief and loaded the injured people aboard. Then it all went wrong.
Harold's engine had worked fine, But what no one realised was most of Harrow's lower extremities were permanently fused to his propeller system. As Harrow's rotor blades began to spin, vital organs would be drawn into the motor and tear him apart from the inside.
Well, now there was no covering it up. The smoke could be seen all morning, but news people were here in an instant. We were told to close gates and start clearing up the mess ourselves, with some help.
Henry Thierry was the only 420 gauge engine on the island. A large engine that had been working on the railway regularly, he had become popular among tourists and the locals.
Henry was called into the yard to help tidy the mess. Working mostly at night, he would cart away the wreckage under cover of darkness.
We had to work quickly and quietly. Henry would cart wreckage from the yard away to the sea. Then one night the points were set wrong and we were diverted to another shed.
Henry had inadvertently been sent to shed number 17, where Thomas had been biofused into a tank engine and had subsequently been declared out of bounds.
It was dark and these sheds all looked the same. I unlocked the doors and Henry rolled in. I didn't see what Henry saw, because as soon as he put his head through doors, he bolted and reversed out.
Keith locked the shed up without seeing what was inside. But Henry had seen it all.
We wouldn't even dare talk about that shed, more than our job's worth.
But Henry had decided to speak up and confront Sir Topham Hatt. That night, he arrived at the railway controller's office.
I don't know what was said in there, but there were raised voices at times. They had a shouting match for 10 minutes. Then Henry left, back to the shed.
By pure chance, he was sent back to the same shed as Thomas that night, and with one sentence, he sealed both their fates.
Henry only said one thing to him: stay away from shed 17. The next day, the fat had a new job for him.
The Flying Kipper route ran through the night, delivering fish from the docks to the mainland, across the highest altitude line in the country.
That old line was treacherous at best, but when Henry was put on there, in the middle of winter, it was a death trap.
In 1970, fish had started being delivered by road to the mainland. It was safer and more cost-effective, and the line was declared redundant. Dangerous and unnecessary, it came as a shock to the islanders when it was reopened.
That fat shite always hated Henry. He didn't like his cheerful manner, and he clearly had other lifestyle choices when he was a human. Fat wanted Henry away from the other engines, and Kipper Run was a death sentence.
On the night of February the 8th, 1983, Henry had only been on the Kipper Run for a week. The following incident would be made into a book and later recreated in the television series.
This is the train the railwaymen call the Flying Kipper.
Can you believe they put it in a kid's story? Of course, that fat f***er changed quite a few of the facts.
They couldn't know the points from the main line to a siding were frozen, and the home signal should have been set at danger, but snow had forced it down.
As the train approached the most treacherous part of the line, unnoticed to Henry, his driver and firemen, the points had diverted them to the adjoining siding, and right into the path of another train.
Henry's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash.
In fact, Al and Barry died from their injuries. Slowly, in snow, the poor bastards.
By midday, the recovery operation was underway, and Sir Topham Hatt had arrived.
Cheer up, Henry, it wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident.
These images from a train spotter's camera were taken the evening before and were successfully covered up by the Sodor Railway Board for 10 years.
There was a railway spike in points, blocking them. Of course, that had disappeared by the time we got there.
I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines.
crew. We all knew what that meant.
They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox.
Crew was, at the time, one of only 2 scrap metal yards in the UK capable of handling and recycling organic material as well as engine parts.
You'll feel a different engine and won't need special coal anymore.
With those few words, he'd sentence Henry to death.
Won't that be nice? Yes, sir, said Henry doubtfully.
Everyone knew he wouldn't see him again, and everything was sewn up nice and neat for that fat As news got out about Henry's accident, it didn't take long for Thomas to realise Henry had been disposed of because of what he knew.
The next evening, Thomas had been put on his own for the night at Knapford Station. As his driver and fireman left, under what was left of his own steam, he set off for the Sodor research complex.
He had a small amount of burning fuel in his firebox, but he was mostly moving under his own strength. It took Thomas 3 hours to get to the complex, the effort to get there nearly killing him.
Thomas arrived at midnight. With no one around, he made his way to the shed where he was created. What he found was the answers to his questions, and many others.
Since Sodor research had begun producing biofueled vehicles, the world had asked, why had the first biofusion operation worked so well, but nearly every operation since had failed? Sadly, Thomas found the reasons inside.
Thomas had never been the first operation. He hadn't even been second.
What shed number 17 contained was evidence of several attempts to create a tank engine with Thomas's DNA. These had been early tests made by people with no experience of an experiment on this scale. Ill-planned and unprepared, these procedures had used DNA from the human Thomas and had been as much the real Thomas as the tank engine the world had come to know and love.
To us, Thomas the Tank Engine had been the Thomas we all knew as a boy. Part of the family the whole island's population had known and respected since Wilhelm first arrived.
In actuality, this tank engine was no more the real Thomas than all the failed creations made over the 12 months before.
This Thomas had all the human Thomas's memories and experiences. He had learned what Thomas had learned, known who Thomas had known, but so had all the previous failures.
Wilhelm and Hans Gertzer had had to learn through trial and error how to bring their Thomas back from the dead. The following experiments had not had the same work put into them, resulting in the freak engines and aircraft that had developed so many problems on Sodor Island and around the world. In Shed 17, Thomas wouldn't discover who he was, but in fact, who he wasn't.
had no idea he was only one of many clones. None of us did. But I guess as time passed, we stopped asking all the questions we had at first. We were just glad our friend was back with us. He could work for us. He became our servant in a way. Someone who drew in the crowds, helped create jobs, was eager to work. Thomas always thought of us as his friends. Sadly, over time we came to think of him as just really useful.
今日會有一批水果同蔬菜抵達碼頭嘅，我要你將食物送去納卜集，繼續做你自己日常嘅工作啦。